Welcome to another episode of Behind the Catch Fence. I'm your host, David Hoffman. Man, the U.S. Nationals are coming in hot, and do we have a special episode in store for you guys? If you can tell by over here at Swamp Rat 1, which means 8-time U.S. Nationals winner Big Daddy Don Garlits is on today. We talk all about his storied history at the Big Go, and he gives us some never-before-heard stories. I know, I'm geeking a lot too, so let's get it rolling. Sit back, relax, grab you some popcorn, because this is going to be a lot of fun. Go enjoy this episode with Don Garlits. Your first win at the Big Go was an interesting one in 1964. You were the only one to not have issues. Everyone else, I guess, in the semifinals had issues or couldn't make the event. You ended up going against Jack Williams there in the finals. How would you describe the craziness of all of that leading up to the finals?
Well, they did it differently then. We ran on Sunday and ran for class, which I won the class, and that gave me a set out. Then they ran 8 cars on Monday, and the winner of that 8-car field would go against me for the final. And they only made a round or so because everybody blew up. And so even Jack Williams' car was all patched together for the final run, but it was a real close race. And I have to tell you a little funny story about that. Jack Williams got way out on the start. He left quite a bit early on the race, but did not get a red light. And I just barely ran him down and caught him at the very end. It was very close. In fact, it was so close, it was only decided by the electronic judging system. And every time I met Jack Williams after that race, for years and years, he said the first words out of his mouth was, "I won that race," because he just barely come up and caught him right there at that last. So anyway, we were on our way to England, for the U.S. drag team for the British Drag Festival in 1964. And Wally Parks was on the SS United States. We're all together. And Wally and I were having a drink going across, in the bar. And, we had our differences over the years, but Wally and I basically were really good friends, believe it or not. We had a lot of respect for each other. And Wally said, "I'll never do that again." And I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, you red lighted in 1963 in the final. And you were the fastest car at the U.S. Nationals. And we wanted you to have the win under your belt when you went over to England. So for the final run, we turned off the red lights and just let it go to be a race." And he says, and Jack Williams jumped out there and he said, "Oh my God, what have we done?" And he said, "We were just praying, please get by, please outrun." And he says, "We were so happy in the tower when the light come on and you're late that you won the race." He says, "Well, never turn the lights off again."
It's a good thing that you got him.
I thought that was cute.
That's just fun. It's a great thing that you got him there at the end.
This is the first time that story's ever been told. But Wally's gone now, so it's fine.
Wow. And you mentioned just with, winning that race. And I guess, what is that first feeling like of winning a big event like that? Because I'm sure it was very just crazy for you to win that race.
Well, I had won the Winter Nationals the year before at Pomona in 1963, when the first time they did introduce fuel back into the NHRA. And that was really my first big NHRA event, 63 at Pomona. But you got to understand something, David. In those days, there was only one really race that you wanted to win, and that was the U.S. Nationals. All these other races, they added them, the Spring Nationals and the Fall Nationals. There'll only ever be one major event, and that's Indy. Even the Gator Nationals now today, which has the largest crowd, much more than Indy, whether you knew that or not, but still does not compare to winning Indy. Indy is the mother of all drag races. And It was started in 1955 at Great Bend, and it'll always be number one in my book and almost every other racer for that matter.
And you certainly had made your stamp on that race. Just you end up winning two more times just in the 60s alone there at Indy. In a time where innovation was so crucial in finding an advantage on the racetrack, how did you find an edge there at Indy during that time frame?
The edge that I have had in drag racing is actually basically one thing, and it's what actually put me out of drag race. That's why I don't run a car today. I could have a team if I wanted to. I don't want one. I always ran my engines so that I could race the next round. My engine had to stay happy. And that's why I was the guy that usually was first over all the speed marks, because when my cars hit the finish line, the engine was happy. Let me tell you about a particular instance. In March of 2003 at Gainesville, I drove my car, Swamp Rat 34, to 323.04 miles an hour. But I did not lift at the finish line. It was pulling so hard, and Gainesville's got 5,000 feet of shutoff area. I thought I'd just drive it another couple hundred feet under power. And I did that. When I lifted off the throttle, I was traveling 340 miles an hour. That's what the front wheel speed on the computer showed when I lifted off the throttle. And the engine was not hurt. I had a happy engine. But that only gives you really the top speeds, is what it gives you. Today, you have to run the engine beyond being a happy engine. The engine has to be hurt to be able to be competitive. I ran for 2 years, 2001 and 2002 and 2003, and I only qualified once at Atlanta. But I had 4 engines and 5 sets of heads when I went into that program in 2003 or 2002, and I still have all my parts. But I only qualified once, and that speaks volumes. And when I got through with that, I knew this is not what I want to do. I don't want to have to come back to the pits and deal with a bunch of broken parts and tore up stuff. And of course, every once in a while, you have the big explosion. You just can't get away from that. When you run your engines as hard as they run them today, you're going to have explosions. And I just don't like that. Number one, I build my own engines. I'm up there at midnight in the dark with the mosquitoes biting me, and I'm setting the camshaft. You think I want to take that to the drag strip the next day and throw it down in the dirt? Of course not. I love my engines. They're part of me. And see, the guys that run the shows now, the John Forces, the Connie Club, they don't build their engines. They don't even want to see them. In fact, John Force has a rule. As soon as they take the engine out of the car that's blown up, they put something over it so you don't have to look at it. I don't blame them. I wouldn't want to look at it either.
It's an art form to have your engine still be intact after those type of runs, and that's just shows how, I guess, masterful you were to keep your engine happy, like you said.
Yeah, in that 2-year period, I never put oil on the drag strip. That was another thing. See, it makes a nice, clean racing surface. But, they used to do it in the old days when I raced. There was guys that ran them real hard. They put 40 degrees in the old 392s for the final, something like that. But they usually blew up way down at the end, and it was the last run. They didn't blow their engines up purposely. The slingshot dragster, see, kept a lot of that away from there, because if you're in a slingshot and you blow it up, you got to have all that fire coming all over you. And most people didn't want that. But, once you went to the rear engine car and you're up front, it don't make any difference. The driver don't get hurt usually.
Kind of going along with with the 1960s, 1967 comes to mind for me in particular when you made that 6-second run there at the end. It wasn't until the finals when you actually hit that, and you said you weren't going to shave your beard until you reached that mark. What do you remember about that time and the grit that it took to reach that
I remember
time?
that whole race like it was yesterday. What do you want to know about it? That morning, Monday morning, I went over and got my Goodyear. I was working for Goodyear. And so I was trying to get the Goodyear tire developed, but the Goodyear tire had not come up to the performance of the M&H yet. So Monday morning, Goodyear came over to my car and gave me $600 cash money and said, "Go over to the M&H truck and get you some tires, Big Daddy, because we know you can't win this race on Goodyears." So I went over to the Goodyear truck, and Marvin was saying there's 2 or 3 stacks of tires. And I said, "I'd like to buy a set of tires." And Marvin said, "I don't have any for sale." He said, "But you might go over to James Warren's pit. He's got a pair of takeoffs. He just bought a brand new set. Maybe he'll sell you the takeoffs." So I went over to Warren's pit. I said, "Marvin doesn't have any tires for sale." And he says, "What?" I said, "That's what he says." He said, "But," he said, "you got some takeoffs. Can I buy them from you?" And he says, "Why don't you just take the new ones I just had mounted?" He said, "They need a run on them." In those days, you'd put a couple of runs on the tires. He says, "You'll be out after the first round anyway." So I took James' tires and put them on the car, and I won the round. I went back over to James and I says, "I won the round. Can I have the tires for another round?" "Sure," he says, "keep them." So long story short, I'm all the way to the final, and it's time to race James Warren. So I go over to James and I said, "James, you want your brand new tires for this final run?" He said, "What did you just run?" I said, 701. He said, "I just ran 685. I think I got the best tires." So, but what James didn't know, I hadn't put any real nitro in my car yet, because I had been running kind of a low percentage because the Goodyears weren't holding real good. You had to be careful how much nitro you put in there. So for that run, I stepped it right up to about 85%, which was a lot for me. I never ran much over that, maybe 86. So anyway, I put 85% in for the final run. And of course, it went 6.77 seconds and won the race. And I don't guess James ever forgave himself for letting me have those tires that day, because that was a major turning point in my career. And also, it did something else. That proved almost everybody else had 392s, on whether you knew that or not. But that was the first big race that a 426 Hemi won. And of course, what the whole race didn't hurt anything. It was an unbelievable deal. It changed a lot of things in drag racing.
And I'm sure he probably never let you take any more tires from him anymore, I'm sure.
Well, I never went over the bar anymore. And of course, after that, then Goodyear did get a handle on it, and we did a lot of testing, lots of testing, at Indy even, and that it was at I was at, so you want to hear about one of the test runs at Indy? This is
Absolutely.
before the U.S. Nationals in 1969, and Perdome was testing too. He worked for Goodyear, so but we were making single runs. We weren't side by side, and my car was about a quarter of a second quicker than the Snake, and they couldn't figure out what was going on. And so the Snake and the Roland Leong are up on the starting line, and they're watching me make this run. And it goes down the course, goes, and Perdome says, "What the hell was that?" And Roland said, "He's got a 2-speed transmission." And I had this box here, and I was telling everybody it's a reverser, but it wasn't working real good. And he said, "A 2-speed transmission." And Roland says, "Yeah." And he says, "You might as well withdraw your entry from the Indy race that's just coming up. This is in August." He says, "But you ain't going to get nothing but outrun." And Perdome just bolted across the parking lot. And it was a payphone at the head of staging lanes at Indianapolis in those days, out in the field. And Perdome is on that phone to California, want to know where did Garlits get this 2-speed transmission. And Leonard Abbott had built one, and he had it in his car, and he took that car out of the car and shipped it to me. And that's what I was using, his homemade one. But I was giving him reports back every week because it's running so good, you know. I mean, I was killing him with that transmission. Well, he gave me a quarter of a second. You know, that's a big jump on your competitors. And so Leonard was designing a brand new one, all aluminum case and everything, a really nice unit, where mine was a little bit on the primitive side. And he sent that to the Snake, and the Snake won Indy with it that year.
You kind of wish he wouldn't have sent that over to him.
He wouldn't have won if we hadn't had that tire test, because I'd have went to Indy with a 2-speed and nobody else would have had one. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So kind of going forward, you dropped off the NHRA tour for a bit, but you went back to the U.S. Nationals in 1984 with Art Malone. That year specifically was crazy because you brought on,
yeah. You know, in 1982, I bought this property in Ocala, and for the next couple of years, it took to move up here. And I mean, I was actually out of racing for all practical purposes. I did a few match races just to make some money, you know, but I wasn't on any circuits. And so 1984, I just finished building my house. The museum had opened in March of 84 officially, and we were up and running. And Malone comes up and said, let's go to Indy. And I said, I'll get us some tickets. I'll call up the president. And he says, no, I don't want to go watch. I want to race. He says, just get one of your cars out of the museum, the best one you got. I'll put the clutch and engine in it. I'll buy brand new stuff, and we'll go to Indy. And that was a whole new deal. We went up there. It's so funny. We didn't even have a spot on the pavement because they were just like two old dinosaurs. In fact, they were calling us dinosaurs. And we were down in the grass. And we set top speed of the meet right off the bat on the third run. And they knew we hadn't come up there for the Budweiser. We had come to win the race, and win it we did. And Malone said, let's go to Pomona to the finals. That we only had one more race. And I said, Art, this motor is pretty used up. I don't think it'll do another big race. He said, here's another 20,000. Get another one. Malone was well heeled. And he made his money in real estate too. And so with a nice new motor, we go out to Pomona and we outrun Gary Beck in the final. And Gary Beck was the record holder for ET. And Malone says, my God, he said, you got no business being retired. Let's get some sponsorship and go full-time racing. And Carl Schieffer was standing right there. And Carl Schieffer's lifelong friend. I knew his dad, Paul, you know. And I remember when Carl was just a little kid. And Carl says, I got a promotion company. I'll get you sponsors if you want to go racing. And so he gathered up Mr. Gasket, Joe Horutka, and the Super Shops guy, Harry Lieberland, and race we did. We won the 85 World Championships and we won the 86 World Championships and won Indy both those years back to back. It was a hell of a tour. And it's all because Malone come up here, wanted to go racing. You know, me and Malone were friends from the 5th grade, or whether you knew that or not. We went to school together. And it's so funny because you want to hear a cute story about that? We're in the 5th grade. And Malone was a big lanky guy, but his mama babied him. He's kind of a sissy. And he wasn't a tough guy then. And I was a little tough guy because I worked at the dairy. Me and my stepdad milked 50 head of cows before school and after school every day. And so I had real tough arms, you know. And so we're going to get off the bus at our bus stop. And Malone don't get up out of his seat. And I said, Malone, Art, this is Pink Gates. This is where we get off. Oh, he says, I can't get off here. Bobby Sampson says, if I get off here, he's going to beat me up. I have to go way up to Florida Avenue. I said, that's a mile out of the way. He said, oh, Bobby Sampson will beat me up. I says, you just get off the bus. And when Bobby Sampson walks up to you, you say a couple of things to him, like go to hell or whatever that is. And I'll be behind him and I'll take care of Sampson. So sure enough, they got off the bus and Sampson says, I told you not to get off this bus stop. I'm going to punch you. And he drove back his fist to hit Art, and I grabbed him around the neck real hard like that and just choked him out. I had real strong arm, and me and Malone, we were like that for the rest of our life, friends forever.
I love that story. That is just crazy. And
But Art soon learned he was a big guy, and he was really tough. He just didn't know it.
you kind of helped him get more tough in a way.
Oh yeah, well he realized that he was tough and strong. His mother was doing that. She was a real, some mothers they don't like the boys being tough, whether you realize it or not. My mom was never like that. She knew you had to be tough, But that showed Art that it was easy to be tough, especially if you were big. He was always bigger than me.
And kind of going, a little bit forward. I know there's so much that we could talk about first off, but, um, you retired in 1992, but you had one more thing on your bucket list, and that was to reach 300 miles per hour. You wind up doing that in 2001 at Indy. What was that feeling like to achieve that goal finally?
Well, the Greek went 300 miles an hour before me, and I've always been really good friends with the Greek. We go way back into the late 50s. And he called me on the phone. He said, Don, I went 300 miles an hour. It's a real thrill. He said, you need to get one of those cars out of the museum, probably Swamp Rat 34, put a new motor in it and go 300. So I did. And I was going to go to Indy. Well, just before time to leave, we had the car all ready to go. And I get a fax from the NHRA that says all these things that I got to do to Swamp Rat 34 to make it legal for the race. Well, I looked at the list. There was no way to do it because it was time to leave that afternoon. So I pulled the plug on the project. Well, it wasn't within an hour, Gary Clapshaw called me and said, my car's entered. It goes 300 miles an hour and you can drive it. And so we went up to Indy and Clapshaw was there. They had a black wrap on the car. It was beautiful. And I did go 303 miles an hour. And I did it side by side with the Greek. It was so cool. And so then I come back to Florida and I had the NHRA tech guy come down. They looked at the car. We made whatever changes was necessary. And in 2002, I started racing the Swamp Rat 34. And like I told you, I ran it for 2 years. It was my best of I went 318 at Indy in 2002. And then in 2003, I went to 323 at Gainesville. And it was a real thrill.
How much different did that feel compared to other runs that you've had over your career?
It was a totally different experience. And when I was driving the first couple of runs in the Clapshaw car, it wasn't doing nothing. It wasn't running good. And Gary got me over to the side. I'll never forget it. He said, Don, this horse isn't going to come to you. You are going to have to come to this horse. And what he meant was my driving technique that I used to use in the 80s was not the driving technique that you used in these 300-mile-an-hour cars. It was a totally different way to drive them. And he says, you're going to have to drive this car the way we drive the cars now, not the way you use. See, I used to drive them just down on the throttle and ease out the clutch. And that's the way I drove them. And I never gave it full throttle until I got out there way. Well, that wasn't activating all the controls and everything. That throttle has to be slammed to the floor, and you don't even do anything. The clutch, you take your foot off of the clutch and pull it into staging with the clutch release. Did you know that? That's how it's done. In other words, it's slipping the clutch then because, see, it's a centrifugal clutch. And so once I did that, I went 300 miles an hour. It's a whole different deal.
Final question for me, just as you reflect on your career, not just the U.S. Nationals, but just your entire drag racing career, what are you most proud of that you've accomplished during your time as a race car driver?
There's two things that I think are real important that I did. Number one was naturally, I didn't invent the rear engine dragster. There's been rear engine dragsters from, I remember the little flathead dragster of the White Owl back in the 50s. But there's never been a rear engine dragster that dominated anything. I perfected the rear engine dragster and made a car that was a championship car. But it wasn't easy. It was 3 months of my life trying to make that car work. And that's why nobody had them, because nobody wanted to spend that kind of time. But I had incentive. I had my foot blown off, and I had a little wife that was on my back too. At one point, we gave up and built a slingshot for 1971. You aware of that? And the car is hanging in the showroom at the Summit in McDonough, Georgia. Never made a run, brand new. And but she come out in the shop and said, "Get back on that rear engine car." So I did. So anyway, the rear engine car development is probably my greatest achievement because it saved so many lives. And then the other one is this museum, because we have preserved the history of drag racing for all future generations to look at and see where it came from. The primitive beginnings, we have the first dragsters, we have all that early stuff, and we got it when it wasn't important. Today, you couldn't buy these pieces. They'd be priceless. And I think that will go down in history as probably one of my other great achievements, the Museum of Drag Racing.
Well, I'm gonna have to go check out your museum here soon because I've looked at pictures online and it just looks fabulous. I have to admit that. And it's just really cool to see what you guys have done with that museum.
If you go on the museum site, garlits.com, and you click on the Swamp Rat Gallery, there will be hundreds and hundreds of pictures of my cars. I did all that. That's my work. I built that part of the website. Took me 6 months to do that. And I'm always correcting. When I find a new picture that I've never seen that's important, I go into the website and put it up. But you can really see the history there on the Swamp Rat Gallery.
I'll have to go check out those photos. Well, Don, I appreciate you taking the time. It's amazing to be able to talk to you, and hopefully you have a great rest of your day. Thanks for watching our show today with Don Garlits. Man, where do I begin? Don is just one of those guys that you can't help but smile every single time that he talks. He has such a passion for drag racing and his career, and it shines so bright through him every single time he talks. Now, side note, if you're ever in Ocala, Florida, make sure to go check out his museum. Man, I'm chomping at the bit to go. It's just got oodles of cars and drag racing history, and it's just stacked at the brim. We appreciate Don joining us. Also, kudos to him. He's 92 years old, still working hard with his museum and simply enjoying life. Well, that's all the time we have for today's show. Comment below what you thought of the episode. Also, be sure to like and subscribe for more racing content. We got plenty more US Nationals coverage coming your way very, very soon. If you want more content, head over to our Instagram and X pages @BehindCatch. Now go enjoy your day, watch some racing, and I'll catch you guys later.